doesn't count as my time with this doesn't count as my time with Bereshit. I just want to thank you, Ronit, so much for coordinating this again. It's an extremely meaningful program and we really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Okay, Bereshit. Can Orthodox Jews believe in evolution? Let's begin with the discussion of time. The Midrash states that the time during the 6 days of creation might not have been the same as the time we know today, because 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, indicating that a day to God is different than that of humans. Furthermore, the order in which living things were created is similar to the order scientists accept life was created: plants, sea creatures, flying creatures, land animals, and then humans. The Kuzari, completed in 1140 by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, states that there cannot be a contradiction between scientific knowledge based on controlled experiments and the Jewish religion. Jewish faith perceives creation in a specific way. God created the universe, establishing natural laws that govern the world and a moral religious set of requirements upon humans. No experiments disprove this. The questions asked by science and Judaism about the origins of the universe are different. Where science is concerned with how the process happened, Judaism is concerned with why God chose to create the earth and explaining the existence and purpose of human beings.
Parshat Noach relates the story of the Tower of Babel. The people wanted to make a name for themselves by building a city and tower whose top reached up to heaven. What was wrong with this goal? Hashem came to see the tower, so the construction itself was not the issue. Therefore, the problem was the purpose of the building. In a famous midrash, it's related that when a brick fell and smashed, the people cried over the tragedy. But when a man fell and died, people continued working, not stopping to see if he could be saved. The goal was to be famous at all costs. Hashem took away the ability to communicate from the people to prevent them from working together, as this gift was used for evil purposes. With social media, we now have innovative ways to once again communicate globally. We need to not abuse this powerful gift, but to use it to make the world a better place.
And God said to Abram, "Go for yourself from your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you." The Torah portion begins with Abraham's first trial, to give up his entire past and follow God's lead to a new land. God said to Abram, "Go for yourself from your land, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you." When a person leaves his hometown, he first leaves his father's house, then his neighborhood, and then his country. Why does the verse list these in the opposite order? When a person makes a physical departure, he first leaves his father's house, then his relatives, and then his country. However, the verse is alluding to Abraham's departure in a spiritual sense. Leaving your hometown means changing your old ways and leaving behind your bad habits. Therefore, the order of the verse is reversed, starting with the easier things. The culture of a person's country is not so deeply ingrained, and so that it can be uprooted relatively easily. More difficult is to rid of bad habits a person acquired from his social circle and friends. Finally, to shake off bad traits acquired at home is very challenging. The Sfas Emes quotes the Zohar, which states that the God called out, "Go for yourself" in every generation, but Abraham was the only one to respond to God's call. God still calls out, "Go for yourself" today, and we need to respond. We must distance ourselves from bad habits and serve God, even though it may require inconvenience or hardship.
Vayera. Vayera begins soon after Avram's bris. Avram learns about Hashem's plan to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and challenges him that killing the righteous of the cities along with the wicked would lack justice and instead would reflect the evil of the wicked individuals. Hashem sends 2 angels to Sodom to test the city, and after they fail the test, he destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. Avram cries out to God that no matter how few righteous dwell in these cities, they're worth saving. At the same time, Avram also recognizes his seemingly feeble humanity. "I've begun to speak with my Lord, and I am only dust and ashes." Avram's defiance to God's unjust intentions and challenges the traditional power dynamic that we usually see in the Torah. Avram does what we might call in today's world speaking truth to power. What this means for us is that we learn that for those being led, that it can be okay to ask questions of leadership around us. From a leadership standpoint, we learn the humility from God to engage in that conversation and explore issues that are brought up.
The beginning psukim of Chaye Sarah read, Sarah's lifetime came to 127 years, and Sarah died in Kiryat Arba. So this parsha actually records only her death. Why then is it called Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah? I'll share two answers, both of which interpret the life of Sarah as her legacy that continued beyond her 127 years. Following her death, Avraham purchases the Marat Machpelah in Eretz Canaan as her burial place. Back in Lech Lecha, Hashem promised Avraham the land of Canaan he had just entered would be for his children. So the purchase of this cave is actually the first legitimate ownership of a piece of that land, the first manifestation of the promise which Sarah helped to bring about. The parsha then continues with the search for a wife for Yitzchak, culminating in his marriage to Rivka. Rashi notes that Rivka continued in the ways of her mother-in-law to bring about a Jewish nation. So the paradox of the title of this parsha is not really a paradox at all. The influence of Sarah's life continued well beyond her 127 years. So Chaye Sarah, the life and legacy of Sarah.
ויאמר עשיו, הנה אנוכי הולך למות ולמה זה לי before. And Esau said, look, I'm going to die, so of what use to me is this birthright? After Esau sold the birthright to Yaakov, the verse tells us that Esau looked at the birthright with disdain. Rashi explains that Esau feared the birthright since he knew that it entailed responsibilities such as performing services in the Beit HaMikdash, and if there were any shortcomings in his performance, he could be punished with death. If so, why was he considered to have treated the Bechira with disdain by selling it? On the contrary, he was showing the importance of the Bechira and the dignity in which his service must be conducted. In the course of life, Hashem gives us many opportunities which can make us greater. He gives us an opening to start a great project or position where we can influence and elevate others. The Torah is telling us not to let these opportunities slip away. Esau had the opportunity to do the service of Bechira and gave it up. The Torah considers the passing of such an opportunity a disgrace. When opportunity comes your way, grab it and enjoy the ride to greatness.
Parsha Vayikra. Let's talk about salt.
Bear with me, I messed up.
Parsha Vayetze. We are introduced to Rachel and Leah. We're told that Rachel was very beautiful and that Leah had einei rakot, sensitive eyes or tender eyes. Rashi tells us that this means that she was crying all the time because she was afraid she would have to marry Esav. But there are so many other ways to understand this. When someone has tender eyes, maybe they see the world in a very understanding way. Maybe she was very sensitive to how she saw things and took things in. Maybe she was a quiet person and thoughtful and contemplative. Maybe she was just nearsighted. But I had a very good insight from my chavruta, Clara Norwood, who said, you know, it could be that they described Leah and Rachel this way just to point out to us that they were different. Like all siblings, in all places, in all times, they're different. They're not the same. They come to us with unique and special qualities.
Vayishlach.
Which is much tougher.
Dina?
I lost her.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, yeah, okay. In Parsha Vayishlach, the pasuk says, Yaakov was left alone and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. The Midrash explains that this man was really Esav's guardian angel, otherwise known as the Satan. Why did this angel only pick a fight with Yaakov? Why didn't he attack Avraham or Yitzchak? Avraham represented Gemilut Chasadim, acts of kindness, and Yitzchak represented Avoda, the service of God through prayer and offerings. Gemilut Chasadim and Avoda are two of the three pillars on which the world stands, according to Pirkei Avot. But the third pillar, Torah, which Yaakov represented, is the most crucial one for the Jewish nation's success in carrying out its mission on earth. The Satan was aware of this and therefore only attacked Yaakov. He knew the most effective way to harm the Jewish people would be to deter them from learning Torah. The evil inclination doesn't mind if a Jew fasts, prays, and gives charity all day long as he does not learn Torah. This is because the Torah is what gives us the energy to help us overcome our instincts and climb the spiritual ladder towards perfection.
Vayeshev. The pantheon of biblical heroines generally includes the matriarchs, Miriam, Ruth, and Esther. But I propose that we add to this august list our foremother, Tamar. She stars in an unlikely role in Parshat Vayeshev, and you can read Bereshit chapter 38 if you want to hear all the sordid details. So why do I propose that she be hailed as a heroine? Because she taught her father-in-law Judah accountability. That trait becomes crucial in Parshat Vayigash when Yehuda must admit his culpability to his brother Yosef. Had Yehuda not learned to take responsibility, the sons of Yaakov might not have survived, and thus there would not have been a Jewish people. It is thanks to our foremother Tamar that our story is able to move forward.
In Parshat Miketz, rather than speak about Yosef and his interpretation of dreams, let's try to understand and determine how someone who started out as a simple shepherd and then became a slave will ultimately be appointed the viceroy of Egypt. I personally think it has to do with his character traits, or the character traits that we see when we read these parshiot. Yosef first exhibits a very, very strong moral compass, especially when dealing with Potiphar's wife, as well as the attribute of honesty. And that's recognized by Potiphar, and work ethic also. And Potiphar ultimately puts him in charge of his estate. In jail, he shows humility. Every time someone tells him how wonderful he is, how he's capable of interpreting all these dreams, he always says it's not him. He's not the one that's interpreting these dreams, but it's Hashem. He also always looks beyond himself, always trying to help other people. These are the kinds of traits and characteristics of the features of a good leader. And I think all of these could be attributed to Yosef.
I'd like to follow through with what Lisa Plavin said about Yehuda, Tamar's father-in-law. In Parshat Vayigash, Yehuda makes a huge point that is so very moving. He courageously approaches Yosef. Of course, he doesn't know the true identity of the person that he's approaching, but doing so, as the first word of the parsha suggests, Yehuda is showing that he is willing to confront the highest authority in Egypt to save his youngest brother and thus his father's life. He pleads with Yosef modestly and eloquently that he and his brothers must bring Binyamin back with them to Canaan, or his father will die. For as he says, nafsho keshura b'nafsho, his soul is bound up with Binyamin's soul. Yehuda, with great pathos, begs Yosef to take himself as a slave rather than Binyamin. Thus, Yehuda, the worthiest ancestor of the Davidic dynasty, proves his valor and his virtue in concern for his father. And Yosef senses from Yehuda's words his trustworthiness. And so immediately following the beautiful speech, Yosef calls upon his servants to leave the room and identifies himself. Ani Yosef. He asks in the same pasuk, Ha'od Avichai. Of course he knows his father is living, but this revelation and the anxiety that he expresses moves us once again.
Parshat Vayechi is the last parsha of Sefer Bereshit, which tells us much about the individuals who founded the Jewish people. Our avot, imaot, and their children. It is followed by Sefer Shemot, which tells us of the formation of the Jewish people, our nation as a whole. I am intrigued by the section in which Yaakov blesses his children. He blesses each one individually with a blessing exactly well suited to each of them. His blessings are hopeful, but they are also sometimes critical. It is clear that he knew and understood each of them as individuals. Soon we will start to refer to them as the Bnei Israel, as a nation and a group. A lesson of presenting each blessing and each individual message is a reminder that we need to balance our identity as a group and preserving the group identity with the need to value each individual.
Shmo, we learn of a new king of Egypt who feels threatened by the large number of Bnei Israel. We see the demise of Bnei Israel through hard work and enslavement. We meet Moshe and hear about his childhood. Moshe leaves his life in Egypt and becomes a shepherd. When Moshe is approached by Hashem to lead the Jews out of Egypt, he refuses the opportunity. Hashem responds calmly and gives 2 miracles, but gets angry with Moshe when he proposes Aaron. So why? Why does he all of a sudden get so angry with Moshe when he mentions his brother? When Moshe was talking about himself, Hashem was calm and clear. When Moshe points to shift responsibilities to his brother, Hashem gets angry. The rage of Hashem burned against Moshe. When challenging tasks are presented to us, we must face them with our own abilities as leaders.
In Parshat Vayera, Hashem reveals himself to Moshe and makes a promise using the 4 words of redemption. Hotzeiti, which means I'll bring out, Hitzalti, which means I'll rescue, Ga'alti, which means I'll redeem, and Lakachti, which means I'll take them out of Egypt. And finally, he promises that he will bring Heveti, his people, back into their own land. Also in this parsha, Moshe and Aaron go to Pharaoh and demand the well-known "let my people go," which is continuously refused. Aaron's staff gets turned into a snake and 7 plagues are sent to the Egyptians: blood, frogs, lice, wild animals, pestilence, boils, and hail. It's widely accepted that the first 3 plagues were actually performed by Aaron and not Moshe, because these plagues involved the Nile River, blood and frogs, and the dust of the earth for lice. And as you might recall, Moshe survived the Egyptian decree to kill all the Jewish male children by being placed in a small ark to float on the Nile River, only to be rescued by Pharaoh's daughter. He also used the dust of the earth to bury the Egyptian soldier he killed. Because he had hakarat hatov, or appreciation, to these inanimate objects, he could not hit them for the plague to occur. But why did he have hakarat hatov for inanimate objects? They have no feelings or appreciation of kindliness. So the lesson we can take from this is that hakarat hatov is not something only for the recipient, but is rather a character trait that we develop for ourselves to be better people. It was so ingrained in Moshe that he was even able to express his gratitude toward inanimate objects.
In Parshat Bo, the last few Makot are performed and the Jews get ready to leave Egypt. Hashem instructs the Jews to get a lamb to eat and put the blood on their doorpost. Along with this, there are very specific instructions from Hashem, a recipe for exactly how to prepare the lamb. This seems a bit inappropriate for the time. The Jews are preparing to leave Egypt and be led to Israel, so why now? We understand that this is to show the Jews' dedication to Hashem. It's not an easy task that Hashem gave them, but even in the mess of everything happening, they showed their loyalty and still followed his specific instructions.
Torah has often been called like water. It nourishes our soul. In Beshalach, as I was reading it, it was really the part of water that just kept coming through. And I thought it was really the beginning of our journey to receive the Torah. God took us out of Egypt and led us to the sea, the water. We were afraid the Egyptians were coming upon us. Moses said, "Do not fear." And God said, "Journey forth." And he split the water as just like raising a Torah. It looks like 2 sides of the Torah. And we had to step forth into that to start accepting it. But as we journeyed 3 more days, we ended up in Marah, and the water was very bitter. And so we complained again, as we do whenever we take on something new. It's difficult and it's bitter. But Moshe said to us, if we listen to God and observe his decrees, he will be our healer and take care of us. And the water was sweetened. We continued on our journey. And then we complained yet again because there was no food and no water. And Hashem said, behold, I will feed you with manna. And he put dew, he put water down for us, covering up our food, but he left it for us daily. He did it as a test. And Hashem said, whether you follow my teachings or not, I will take care of you. And he fed us every day. So what we need to learn from this is that God will take care of us, and that each year we have the opportunity to step into that Torah, step into that sea, and follow his teachings.
In Parshat Yitro, Moshe's father-in-law, introduces a judicial system for Moshe to use instead, due to the fact that Moshe is being overwhelmed by the amount of things he is required from the people. From this, we can learn two things. One, that we should be receptive to an outside idea, as Yitro is not born from Bnei Israel and was an outside source who converted in. And two, that as a leader, Yitro brings the idea to Moshe to be able to delegate tasks to others.
Mishpatim, Exodus 21, 22 to 25. When men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other harm ensues, the one responsible shall be fined when the woman's husband demands compensation. The payment will be determined by judges. But if other harm ensues, the penalty shall be life for life. In other words, if a miscarriage is caused, the offender is fined for damages, but there is no other punishment, as the fetus is not regarded as a person. The key word in all of this is harm, which in Hebrew is asan, which could also be translated as disaster, damage, or calamity. In the mid-3rd century, the Torah began to be translated into Greek, known as the Septuagint, and there the word asan was translated into Greek, which I do not speak, so I will not say, which was otherwise translated as from the image, but has further been reduced to the word form. This was reinforced by 1st century philosopher Philo during the late Second Temple period in Alexandria, Egypt, Jewish community. Philo, one must understand, was Hellenized, and his interpretation did not impact Jewish oral law, but it did impact Christianity as they were dependent upon the Greek translation. Rashi compares the fetus to a rodef, a pursuer, and the halakha allows killing a pursuer to save one's life. Yehuda Hanassi, the final editor of the Mishnah, states in Yevamot, if she, a woman, is found pregnant until the 40th day, it is mere fluid. In Gittin 23b, he holds that a fetus is considered as its mother's thigh, that is part of her body. Mishnah Olahot says, if a woman is having trouble giving birth, they cut up the child in her womb and bring it forth limb by limb, because her life comes before the life of the child. But if the greater part has come out, one may not touch it, for one may not set aside one person's life for another. Rashi concurs on Sanhedrin, citing that if the baby's head comes out, we do not destroy to save one life for another. And this probably is echoing Genesis 2:7. Rabbi Jacob Emden, in a responsa, that was 1697 to 1776, his life, said a woman is permitted to abort if carrying the fetus would cause her great pain or woe. That pain may be psychological, as in rape or incest, or if the fetus has been diagnosed with a disease like Tay-Sachs. In other words, Jewish law and value takes into consideration dignity, avoiding pain, relationships, and health and well-being, especially that of the mother's life. It does not assign life as the beginning of conception, does not speak to an unwanted pregnancy, unless it were to be the cause of grief, and is certainly not about form.
Parsha Truma. At the beginning of the parsha, there is an appeal to Am Yisrael, calling every person to donate his possessions. In this appeal, we find a surprising expression. Speak unto the children of Israel that they take for me an offering. Had any of us been asked to phrase this request, we would have written it more like, speak unto the children of Israel that they give for me an offering, since the children of Israel are being called upon to give a donation, not take one. In this phrasing, the Torah reveals to us an incredible idea with this verse. When you give, you get. The getting that is inherent in the act of giving is expressed not only by the sense of satisfaction which accompanies any good deed we do, even the love, prestige, or respect which we gain from donating to society or to the community are not enough to make the act of giving itself to be considered by us as taking. The real benefit which we gain when we give is when we, the real benefit which we gain when we give to people around us is the change that occurs within us, in our personality. Therefore, the Torah defines the act of donation as taking, not giving.
Parashat Tetzaveh is a continuation of the theme that began in Parashat Truma, describing the creation of the Mishkan. We already heard the start of God's instructions for how to construct the Mishkan, and this parasha focuses on other aspects of it, though not on the physical structure of the Mishkan itself. Instead, it begins with a detailed description of the garments that will be worn by the Kohanim. Aaron and his sons, Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Itamar, have been designated to serve God on behalf of the people as priests. Aaron is high priest, his sons as regular priests, and that service requires them to wear special clothes and to master certain rites and rituals. The designation is eternal, meaning that any man who is descendant from Aaron will inherit this designation as a priest among the Jewish people. Indeed, in Parashat Tetzaveh, there is a description of how future high priests are to be inducted to replace Aaron. What happens after the description of the priestly garments? God instructs Moses about how to go about consecrating the priests. It's an elaborate ceremony that involves their immersion in a mikvah, dressing in the aforementioned priestly garments, and bringing a series of offerings to God.
Kitisa.
Here we go. Okay. Kitisa. And all the people stripped themselves of their golden earrings that were on their ears and brought them to Aaron. He took from their hands, fashioned it with an engraving tool, and made it into a molten calf. The building of the golden calf is one of the most tragic events and destructive episodes in all of Jewish history. The question is, why is it related to us in the Torah in this particular place? We are in the midst of a long and detailed discussion about the construction of the Mishkan. For 2.5 parshiot, that is the dominant theme. Then suddenly the tragedy of the golden calf is spelled out in living color. And then for another 2.5 parshiot, we return to our detailed discussion of the Mishkan. An additional factor to consider is that chronologically, the building of the Mishkan postdated the building of the golden calf. The order is inverted. We should first have read about the golden calf and then the Mishkan. What can we learn from the peculiar positioning of this narrative? I think all of us with any experience with education, whether students, patients, or our children, have heard of sandwich feedback, or what Rabbi Lamb refers to as the Oreo cookie approach. Start with a compliment, deliver the difficult news gently, and conclude with a compliment. He's a really great kid. He has lots of energy. Sometimes he's disruptive, and if we can channel that energy, he'll do great. He's a super great kid. Hashem sandwiched the sin of the golden calf in the middle of the construction of the Mishkan to let us know we had done wrong, but also emphasize how truly good we are and how great we can be.
So as everyone has keep saying, the bulk of Parshat Vayakhel deals with the physical construction of the Mishkan. We're still in the Mishkan. But since we tonight are gathered here as a sisterhood of women, I actually want to highlight the fact that this Parsha, more than any other, focuses on the women of Bnei Yisrael and their specific contributions to the community. So regarding of the construction of the Mishkan, the pasuk says, Vayavo ha'anashim al nashim. Men and women, all those whose hearts moved them, came bringing brooches, earrings, rings, and pendants. And then the following psukim talk about women specifically are spinning yarn, fine linen, and goat hair to make beautiful cloths and drapes. And in fact, they were so productive, Moshe actually had to say, Ish v'isha, al yasu od melacha l'trumat hakodesh. Let no man or woman, and the fact that he keeps the word woman, ish or nashim, are repeated multiple times is very unusual. But let no man or woman make further effort towards gifts for the sanctuary. There's just so much productivity happening. But contrary to what Moshe had to announce, may we all never stop sharing our wisdom and spiritual insights with our community.
This parsha begins as a recounting of all the materials and details needed to build the Mishkan, as Rachel just said, and ends with the final product being constructed. In keeping with my theme tonight, I'm going to relate this to creation. According to the Ramban, the Mishkan was a portable Har Sinai. It was a place of continual revelation where Hashem's presence could be felt and experienced. According to the Midrash, the Mishkan's significance goes beyond even this. The sages describe it as a microcosm of the universe, with each of its vessels corresponding to another part of creation. The Ohel Moed paralleled the sky or atmosphere, the menorah paralleled the sun and moon, The Kior paralleled the oceans, etc. As opposed to the creation in Bereshit, the construction of the Mishkan is very gradual, intentional, and executed by the Jewish people themselves. Similarly, it is up to all of us to work together with Hashem's guidance to keep our personal spaces sacred as well as the world at large.
Parsha Vayikra. Let's talk about salt. We are told that when the mincha offering was brought, the mincha offering being the one of flour and oil, that it had to have salt. It could not be brought without salt. It was not considered valid. But why salt? There's a midrash that says that the oceans at the time of creation made a deal with Hashem because the oceans wanted to be up in the heavens, but God said, no, you had to be down below. So because the oceans are made of salt water, God said to the oceans, we'll make a deal. Salt will be a very important part of Jewish life for all eternity. Another important idea about salt is that it's a preservative, and symbolically one could see salt as having a role in preserving Jewish tradition. So like we put salt on the mincha offering in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, we also put salt on our challah every week on Shabbat in remembrance of that in the carry-on of
Parsha.
Go ahead, Rena. You're muted.
I'm fine for Tiff to take my turn. I'm okay. Parshat Tzav. This week's portion begins with Hashem telling Moshe to tell Aaron and his children a few laws. Hashem does not tell Moshe to speak to Aaron. He tells Moshe, Tzav et Aaron, command Aaron. Tzav, Rashi explains, is a powerful word. It means command with a charge that is to be executed with speed and diligence and is only used for situations that have eternal ramifications. If we analyze the next few commands, we may be left wondering, why did these charges need the powerful preface Tzav? Preface. The next verse is about the Korban Olah, a sacrifice that's committed entirely to Hashem. No part of the animal is left for human benefit. The person who brings it wants to make sure that it's offered with the highest standards of halakha. The admonition, Tzav, surely is appropriate. However, the Torah only spends one verse on the Olah. It proceeds to tell us about the daily cleaning of the ashes of the altar. Why is this menial job mentioned together with the holy Olah? To what end does it merit the powerful command of Tzav? The disciple Gaon was not known for lengthy conversation. People would write questions to him. He would read the note, hardly lift his eyes, and would start to pray. He would often condense his advice into 1 or 2 sentences, but it would be potent. People asked, and he answered. An aspiring young man whose quest to be as great a scholar as the disciple himself came with a problem. I come home from yeshiva, and the scene in the house leads me to despair. The table is not set, the kitchen is hardly clean, and the children are not bathed. What should I do? How can I concentrate on my studies when I have such problems? The scholar expected the discipler to advise him on how to deal with a wife who was not keeping up to his standard. The discipler looked up from the paper and made a grave face. You really want to know what to do? The young man eagerly nodded. The discipler responded, take a broom. Rabbeinu Yonah of Garandi explains the juxtaposition of the command to sweep ashes with that of the Korban Olah. A person must realize that sometimes what is considered menial work in human eyes merits the highest accord in Hashem's eyes. The mitzvah of sweeping the altar is prefaced with the word Tzav and placed next to the Korban Olah. In the quest for spirituality, one must never demean the simple chores, for no matter how holy one is, there is always room for a broom.
Good evening, everyone. In Parshat Shmini, we see the recounted story of Nadav and Abihu, who were killed in the Mishkan because, according to Rav Hirsch, they brought a sacrifice that wasn't meant for them and at the wrong time. In the corresponding Haftorah to this Torah portion, King David is told that he will not be allowed to build the Beit HaMikdash. Rather, that responsibility would go to his son, King Solomon. The reasoning given for this was that King David was in charge of clearing the land of Israel from all enemies, making it a safe place for King Solomon to later build the temple. Each person had their respective job, exclusive to them and their capabilities. From the stories in Parshat Shmini and its Haftorah, we learn that everyone has a distinctive role in the world and in their individual communities. When we all focus on using our unique skills to benefit the world around us, we can recognize that each contribution is valuable and that using our collective strengths can help us achieve great results.
Lashon hara, negative speech, is a very serious sin and results in the transgressor being afflicted with sarat, a leprosy-like illness. Why is the sin of Lashon Hara so severe that it must be punished with tzara'at? The Torah states, and Hashem blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living being. Onkelos translates a living being as a speaking spirit. Accordingly, it's a soul that gives a person the power to speak. Because the soul and the ability to speak are directly connected, great damage is done to the soul when someone sins through speech. Lashon Hara is therefore punished severely and instantaneously. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel once sent his servant Tavi to buy good food. Tavi, who was famous for his wisdom, brought back a tongue. Thereupon, Rav Shimon sent him to buy some bad food. Again, he returned with a tongue. Rav Shimon asked him to explain how the same food could be both good and bad. Tavi answered, from a tongue can come good and bad. When a tongue speaks good by complimenting or praising another, there is nothing better. But when a tongue speaks evil, when it tells Lashon Hara or makes fun of people, there is nothing worse. It can break up families and kill. The verse states, death and life are in the hands of the tongue, from Mishlei. The tongue is mightier than the sword. A sword can only kill someone nearby, whereas words spoken on one continent can hit the heart of someone on another continent. The tongue of all the limbs and organs moves with the least difficulty and most speed. Consequently, Lashon Hara is one of the sins committed most frequently. It's for this reason that the mouth is guarded with two gates, the teeth and the lips. A person has to think it twice before he says something once. A bird that escapes may be caught again, but a word that escapes will never return.
I asked Ronit to tell me which parsha is left last, and that's the one I'm going to take. And it was Parashat Metzorah. And the reason I asked for this parasha is I work a lot about Hasidei Ashkenaz, a pietistic movement for the Middle Ages. And the head of the pietistic movement used to study the Masachtot that no one touched and that were never open. And someone asked him, well, why don't you study Brachot, just Sanhedrin, something exciting? And he said, it's like a met mitzvah. I want to do those mitzvot that should not be forgotten. And when I saw that Metzorah was left last, I asked myself, so what's so bad about this parasha that no one wants to work on it? And when I read it a few times this week, and it's really tough because it has a lot of impurities or things that seem physical to us that have all these spiritual understandings inflicted on them. And this whole sachar ve'onesh, or the way we treat these diseases, really brought a lot of moral questions to me. And first of all, I'm thankful for the questions, and I want to continue thinking of them. But one thought that Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch says is that tzarat from the Bible is not, negat tzarat is not machalat tzarat. It's not the disease itself, it's a spiritual thing. And it was important for me because I think of all the people who have been sick and with tzarat and with other diseases and were thought about badly, and how careful we should be when we think we understand something to question once again, well, did this word in the Bible actually mean then what it means now? Or did I read enough? Did I look it up enough before I assume something? So that was important for me to learn. Thanks.
Okay, Parshat Achrei Mot. Achrei Mot is most well known for teaching the laws of Yom Kippur, when the Kohen Gadol enters the Kodesh HaKodashim to atone for Israel's sins. There are many obscure elements of the Yom Kippur Avoda, but none are so perplexing as that of the Seir LaAzazel. The high priest is offered 2 goats, identical in every way. By casting a lot, he determines which goat will be sacrificed to God in the Beit HaMikdash and which will be LaAzazel, for or to Azazel. The commentaries struggle to figure out what, or perhaps who, this Azazel is. Rashi suggests that this word means a rocky cliff and refers to the fact that this literal scapegoat, this is where we get the term scapegoat, so Rashi, that Azazel refers to the fact that the goat will be thrown off a cliff in the desert. However, the Ramban, drawing on the Midrash, explains that Azazel is actually an alias for the archangel of all evil, Samael. The high priest offers up this scapegoat as a sacrifice, or more specifically, a bribe, so that this demon, Samael, does not interfere with our atonement on Yom Kippur. I know what you're thinking. This is wild, borderline blasphemous, and smacks just a little bit of Avodah Zarah. Many of us have the urge to find rationalist ways of defanging this myth, but I offer this midrash to you both to spark your curiosity and as a reminder that this too is part of our tradition.
One of the most well-known psukim in the Torah is in Parshat Kedoshim. Lo tikom velo titor et bnei amecha ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha ani Hashem. Shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against members of your people. Love your fellow as yourself. I am Hashem. One might wonder if it's wrong to talk only about loving your fellow Israelite as yourself. However, just a few psukim later, we're also specifically instructed to love the strangers because we too were strangers in Egypt. These instructions to love our fellows and the strangers are complementary. Still, the Torah creates two distinct categories of people, those who are like us and those who are not. We can think about those who are not like us to include not only non-Israelites, but also those who are not like us in other ways, such as having different observance, lifestyles, political views, or differing from us in any number of ways. Although it's easier to love those who are like us, the challenge is to love those who are not. Thus, the parsha and the Torah describe specific ways we must act to actualize and demonstrate that love, ultimately contributing to unity. Chag Sameach.
Parshat Emor is named after the first word in the parsha, which is speak, Emor. Hashem tells Moshe to speak to the Kohanim and say to them or tell them. Why are we using Emor twice? Why are we using speak and tell? The first time that we use Emor is normal. Hashem speaks to Moshe a lot of times in the Torah, but speak to them and say to them or tell them the second time around is not as normal. Why do we have two times that we're using speak or say to them? So maybe this could be used as a different way of speaking, a way of speaking so that someone can actually understand and internalize what you're speaking about. Rashi uses an example from Yevamot, which deals with an adult's responsibility to teach children or to lead by example. So a lot of times we tell our children or other people's children how to do things or what to do. We try to lead them, but if we're not actually doing those things ourselves, they're not going to listen. They're not going to lead by our example because we're not really giving an example. So Rashi thinks this means say to them, teach them, and also be this way. Lead them in a way that you're doing what you say. That way is a great way to teach the next generation by telling them things and also showing them by your own example so that they internalize and that becomes their way of conduct.
Parshat Bahar marries two of my favorite topics, food and rest. But what's the relationship between the two? And what do we learn about holiness from this relationship in the Torah generally and in Bahar specifically? So we'll begin with food and we'll think about how throughout the Torah, there are instances of how inextricably bound up our love for Hashem is with natural cycles, our land, and our food sources. The Shalosh Regalim themselves have their roots in Torah, but are also incredibly important and bound up with agricultural cycles. We sanctify the Shabbat and Chagim with wine, the totality of kashrut, manna, what we eat, the Shema from Parshat Ekev articulating how our love and service to the divine is connected with rain in its proper time. The list goes on and on about the importance and the holiness of food. And what about rest? It's fundamental to Judaism. Observing the Sabbath is among the 10 Commandments. Numerous parshayot deal with the various prohibitions on work, etc. So where does it all come together? In Bahar, chapter 1, verse 2, the English translates to, when you come to the land that I am giving you, the land shall rest a Sabbath to the Lord. The land shall rest. So to put it all together, we know that we eat and it's holy, and we know that we rest and that's holy. But this takes that relationship to a whole new level. The Torah is telling us something quite radical here. It's a reminder of our embodiment as divine beings and how we're connected to everything. As embodied souls, our challenge is to transcend forgetfulness and elevate our consciousness. So food is intimate. The earth provides it. We incorporate its miraculous products into our bodies. We transform it into physical energy. They revitalize cycles of growth. And if ever there were a radical act that takes us beyond the boundaries of our own bodies, it's eating. We are, in fact, what we eat, which is why the ultimate expression of divine singularity, the Shema, is so deeply connected to food. So Bahar reminds us, the land shall rest, a Sabbath to the Lord, because we are in fact not separate from the land. We are our food, its source, and so we are bound up in all of creation.
Bechukosai. The very end of the parsha contains the mitzvah of Temurah. The mitzvah takes up no more than a single pasuk in the entire Torah. He shall not distinguish between good and bad, and he should not substitute for it. And if he does substitute for it, then it and its substitute shall be holy. It may not be redeemed. The halacha is that if a person has designated an animal as an offering and he wants to switch it for another animal, he is not allowed to do that. If he attempts to do it anyhow, the switch does not work and both animals wind up becoming holy. The next pasuk in the Torah, which is the last pasuk in Sefer Vayikra, is, "These are the commandments that Hashem has commanded to Moshe to deliver to the children of Israel on Mount Sinai." The simple reading is that this final pasuk is a general statement referring back to all the mitzvos appearing in Sefer Vayikra. This would be well over 200 mitzvos that are referred to by this pasuk. This includes all the mitzvos of the sacrifices, all the forbidden relationships, dozens of varied mitzvos that appear in Parshas Kedoshim, all the mitzvos of Kuna, the Yomim Tovim, and so forth. In Sefer Mechamas Yehuda, there is another message over here. According to the Mechamas Yehuda, perhaps Elua mitzvos is not referring to the conglomeration of all the mitzvos in the book of Vayikra, but rather it is referring specifically to the two mitzvos with which Sefer Vayikra concludes. The halacha is that if a person donates something to a Kedesh, then he wants to redeem it, Hekdesh, then he wants to redeem it, he needs to add 20% to the value of the thing he wants to redeem. And two, the halacha of Temurah, that if a person tries to switch an animal that he has already declared Kodesh, then the result will be that both the original animal and its replacement will be Kodesh. Here quotes the Rambam at the end of Hilchos Truma. It appears to me that the rationale behind the mitzvos of Temurah is similar to the rationale for adding 20% to the value of his house if he redeems it. The Torah probed into the bottom line thoughts of a person and a bit of his evil inclination. For the nature of man is to wish to increase his possession and to be overly protective of his money. And even though he initially vowed and sanctified his property, perhaps he regretted that and now wishes to redeem his property back from Hekdesh for less than it is really worth. Therefore, the Torah says that if he wishes to redeem his property, he must add a fifth. Similarly, if someone sanctified an animal, he may want to change his mind. He may try to swap the animal for another animal of lesser value. If the Torah would give him permission to upgrade his offering, switching an inferior animal for a superior one, he might come to switch a superior animal for an inferior, saying the new one is better. Therefore, the Torah sealed the path before him by not allowing any exchanges and penalizes him for any attempt to make an exchange. That is all designed to mold his evil inclination and to ameliorate his thought processes. This is what the Torah is all about. The bottom line is the Torah is to make us into better people with better hashkafos and better mitzvos. These two mitzvos, adding 20% to redeem Hekdesh and the penalty for trying to swap a sacred animal, are all about breaking our bad habits, because the Torah knows that human beings tend to be cheap. They don't want to part with their money. This, according to Mechamas Yehuda, gives a new meaning to the final pasuk, Elua mitzvos, is referring
10 seconds,
to these.
Heather.
Sorry. Okay, I'm done.
Parshat Bamidbar is usually read on the Shabbat before Shavuot. So is there a connection between the giving of the Torah and Bamidbar, the desert? According to Rabbi Sachs, the desert is a place of silence. It is barren and desolate, with few distractions visually or audibly. It is an ideal place to receive the Torah and truly hear the words of Hashem. The giving of the Torah was revolutionary in that it was a gift to all the people, not a select few. Everyone was to have access to hear and learn the laws. This was universal education. Hashem revealed himself not through a prophet, but to all the people. The Jewish people have always been known for their emphasis on learning. Tonight, we are continuing this tradition, and in just a few days, we will have the opportunity to study in a concentrated way on Shavuot.
Kohanim, with that chant, the priestly blessings from Naso begin. In mini Sidurim, there are secondary verses and the prayer for dreams. In the progression of the main blessings, the culminating bracha is for shalom. In looking at the entire service, the concept of shalom or shalemut seems to be the unifying theme. In the text about dreams, there is mention of the hope that if a dream is good, it should be strengthened. If, however, the dream requires healing or transformation, it is the hope that this can be accomplished. The Rifa'enu prayer expresses the desire that a refuah shalema should occur. So too the prayer's element that addresses teshuvah. In the Avinu Malkeinu, there is a verse in which we seek teshuvah shalema. Following the duchening is Sim Shalom, a prayer about peace. It concludes with B'chol Eid u'B'chol Sha'ah B'Shlomecha. We seek shalom when we are awake and when we dream. May all of us be blessed with shalom and shalemut.
In Parshat Bahalotcha, we get instructions for Aharon to light the menorah in the Mishkan. So it says, Bahalotcha et hanerot. So I wanted to talk about the distinction for a second, why we have the word laha'alot, Bahalotcha, instead of the regular word for candle lighting, lahadlik. You know, on Shabbat, we say lahadlik ner on Yom Tov. So why does this parsha have a different word? So the distinction between lahadlik and laha'alot, lahadlik just means to light, to kindle. But in the Torah, traditionally, it has the connotation of a fire, a destructive fire, to burn things down, like a conflagration. And it's not how we use it today, but it's just a straightforward, it's a fire. Laha'alot has a different connotation. It means to raise up, to elevate. When you mount the lamps, when you raise up those candles, and it has a connotation of encouraging the fire to lift up the mitzvah and to be more beautiful. And it made me think about sometimes when we're standing lighting candles for Shabbat or Yom Tov, you know, if you're lighting and the match doesn't catch the wick right away, you kind of prod the wick with the match and encourage it to, sometimes even have to get it to stand up a little bit with the edge of the match, and like you're coaxing the light out of it. It seemed to me like a metaphor for encouraging ourselves and each other to be our best selves and to bring out the light in ourselves and each other. And it felt especially just more beautiful to me than the word lahadlik. And so I hope that as we light our candles for the Shabbat and this Yom Tov, that we think about that, and that we can, over the course of Shavuot, as we're learning, that we can, we can light a special flame in ourselves and in each other through our study of Torah.
In Parshat Shlach, Moshe sends the heads of each tribe and sends them into Israel on a reconnaissance mission. We all know the story. They come back, they say it's bad. There's no way we can conquer the land. We shouldn't go. It's nothing good. In the Haftorah, not ironically, we read about Yehoshua sending 2 spies into Israel, and they come back with a glowing report, reassuring the people that they can indeed conquer the land. So what was the difference between Moshe's spies and Yehoshua's spies? When Moshe sent the spies, Bnei Israel was new. They had just left Egypt, they crossed the Red Sea, and the heads of the tribes whom Moshe had appointed each had an agenda. What would be the best for their tribe? When Yehoshua sent spies, Bnei Israel had been wandering for 40 years, and they had become a cohesive nation, a real community, if you will. Those spies came back having the entire nation in mind. As we know, Bnei Israel went in and did in fact conquer the land, and the rest is, well, history. But what we can learn from this is the importance of community. We will all be more successful when working together towards common goals, when it becomes less about me and more about we.
The Korach rebellion was the most dangerous challenge to Moshe's leadership in the 40 years that he led them through the Midbar. Who were these rebels? Were they the multitudes, the Erev Rav? No, they were leaders of their communities, descendants of Levi and Reuven, and the firstborn of the other tribes. They felt entitled to leadership positions and disgruntled about all that was happening since the debacle of the spies. Moshe asked God to open up the ground and swallow up these rebels, and it actually happens. The next day, however, the people were angry at Moshe for killing God's people. God then tells Moshe to take 12 rods to the Ohel Moed. The next day, the staff bearing Aharon's name and the tribe of Levi had sprouted. This was a telling end of the rebellion. The use of force did not end it, but rather the miraculous flowering of the dead wood. The stick that came to life again symbolized that hope was not dead.
So Parshat Chukat, this is a thought from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs on Mei Meriva. Rabbi Sachs pointed out that before Mei Meriva, there were two similar episodes of the Jewish people complaining and asking for water. In the previous two situations, Moshe was able to manage the complaints without the emotional distress that we see here in Parshat Chukat. So the question is, why did Moshe react the way that he did in Parshat Chukat? So Rabbi Sachs points out that the pasuk before the Mei Meriva episode, we learn that Moshe's sister Miriam died. So it was not just the Israelites' complaints that caused him to lose control over his emotions. It was dealing with this in the midst of grief after he lost his eldest sibling. Miriam had watched over Moshe as a child, supported him throughout the years, and shared the leadership role with Moshe as a leader of the women. So I would add that from this we can learn the importance of caring for ourselves and our own needs. If we don't, things tend to break down and our relationships and responsibilities can suffer. We all have our own responsibilities and leadership roles, and this can be a reminder for us to take the time to care for ourselves before caring for others' needs.
I have now been fortunate enough to learn Parshat Balak 3 times, and this time I wanted to learn and research a part of Balak I had never found an answer for. This Parsha encounters curses, idol worship, and resisting God. But is it necessary to name a Parsha after an evil person? One response explains that Balak is one of 6 Torah portions that are named after central characters: Noach, Sarah, Yitro, Korach, Pinchas, and Balak. All of these parshiot are named for righteous characters except Balak, the wicked king who tried to curse the Jews, as well as seducing them to cause a horrific plague. One answer explains that the reason is due to this parsha's presentation of the power of transformation. The most prominent example is how Bilam's curse turns to blessings, and Balak too embodies a transformation. The Talmud relates Ruth to this story, who transformed her life when converting to Judaism. She is King David's grandmother and a descendant of Balak, and knowing that Mashiach will come from King David, Balak is charged with transforming the Jewish people, is a direct descendant of Balak. He may be an evil person, but nonetheless, he is important in the future of the Jewish nation. Therefore, his story and rulership is important to our history.
Can you tell him to be quiet? Parshat Pinchas? Yeah?
Go ahead.
Okay. Shortly before his death, Moshe requested that his sons be appointed as his heirs. This is not uncommon in the business world, so we might have expected to have Moses and sons in the spiritual world. The Midrash says that God refused his request and informed him that Joshua was the most suitable person to serve as his successor. Rabbi Yaakov Edelstein notes that the only way to become a Torah scholar is to study hard and diligently over a long period of time. And all along, Joshua was simply more diligent than Moshe's sons. Rabbi Edelstein continues his idea and adds that one should never think that the Torah is passed down from father to son as an inheritance. The danger of such thinking is twofold. First, if your father is not a rabbi, then you will feel that you have no chance of progressing in your Torah studies and becoming a rabbi in your own right. Second, if your father is a rabbi, you might think that you do not need to concentrate on your Torah studies because you will inherit his job.
He adds, so if you see a dynasty of great rabbis and leading Torah scholars, then you have proof that each one studied hard and achieved what he did in his own right and not through nepotism. Rabbi Edelstein's idea can be applied to the father-son relationship. It is not at all simple, or I should say father-daughter, maybe. It is not at all simple to be the son of and to follow in your father's footsteps without losing your own original imprint. He tells the story of Rabbi Aharon Roka, who was appointed to the head of the Belt Hasidim in place of his father. The elder Hasidim asked him if he would follow in the ways of his father's leadership. He replied, "Of course I will. Just like he did not imitate his father and chose to act independently, I plan to do the same."
Matot. We read how the 2.5 tribes of the Jewish people were allowed to settle east of the Jordan, outside of the boundaries of the Holy Land. We're going to focus on the tribe of Manasseh. Why was it divided, half on one side of the border and half of the other? There are 3 Perushim on this. One is the Ramban that says simply that Moshe realized there wasn't enough space, an issue that I'm sure we can all relate to. And so it was necessary to find volunteers who were willing to settle on the other side. The Nitziv on his commentary says that Manasseh had the best teachers within the nation. And Moshe knew that the side that was separating out from the rest of Bnei Israel needed to have good teachers with them to ensure they remained connected. The last is the Degel Machane Ephraim. He explains that Moshe was afraid that once Reuven and Gad would be geographically separated from the rest of the people, they would attain a separate independent identity, which could lead to a split in the nation. Consequently, he created a bridge, half of Manasseh on this side, half on the other side, so there was a constant flow of people between them. Everybody knew they might be separated, but it was one nation. From Moshe, we learn how important it is to always create and maintain bridges within the Jewish people to guarantee our togetherness and unity at all times.
Maseh. The first half of Parshat Maseh serves as a travel log for the last 40 years, recording in painstaking detail every place where the Israelites camped. Maseh then turns to describing the exact boundaries of the lands God promised to Israel, the process by which the lands will be allotted to the 12 tribes, and similar details. We can surely understand the importance of laying out the designated territories of Eretz Yisrael. But why dedicate the first 50 psukim of the parsha to a banal list of places where the Israelites previously camped? Bamidbar Rabbah offers a parable likening the matter to a king whose son was ill. It teaches, the king brought his son to a certain place to heal him. When they returned, his father began recounting the stages. Here we slept, here we cooled off, here you had a headache. Similarly, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moshe, recount to them all the places where they provoked me. Recounting these specific geographic coordinates becomes a way of remembering all that we've been through and how much we've grown. Like anyone starting a new chapter in life, moving forward makes us nostalgic for the past. The Torah and Midrash teach us that God too experiences such nostalgia for his journey with the Israelites in the desert.
Dvarim. So Dvarim opens up with the beginning of Moshe's final speech to Bnei Israel before his death when they enter Eretz Yisrael. And it's always the parsha that we read right before Tisha B'Av. And the reason is because Moshe is completely exacerbated and overwhelmed about leading the Jewish people. They've given him such a hard time and put him through the ringer. And he says in the parsha, how am I going to carry this burden? How am I going to handle this? And that word echa is the connection to Tisha B'Av, because we read echa, we read Lamentations. And there's actually 3 times that we have the word echa in the Torah. We have it here in Dvarim with Moshe. We have it with Yeshayahu in the Haftorah about Chazon. And we also have it in Megillat Echa. But there's actually a 4th time. And they're all times of exasperation and really negative moments in life. But the 4th one is with Adam, when God is looking for him in the Garden of Eden, in Gan Eden. And he says, Ayeka, where are you? And he's saying, who are you? Where are you? Who is your essence? So we're supposed to look into ourselves, look at and see our stock of and awareness of who we are, Ayeka, of where are you? So we don't get to the point of exasperation. Echa, how did we get here?
Parshat Be'et Hanan covers the following: Moshe's request to see the land, We hear admonitions, reassurances, the 10 Commandments, the Shema, and the discussion of guidelines for interacting with the Canaanite nations. But as we are about to celebrate Shavuot, Matan Torah, Nechama Leibowitz highlights the following in the parsha. Perek 5, Pesukim 2 and 3. The Lord our God made a covenant with us in Horeb, Har Sinai. The Lord made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us, who are all of us here alive this day. It is stated above that the covenant at Horeb was not made with the generation that left Egypt. It is worthy of note that the Torah does not state that the covenant was not made with them alone. Rather, it explicitly affirms that the Lord made not this covenant with our fathers. The Torah was not given exclusively to one particular generation. The covenant was not struck with one generation. Moshe reaffirms this fact on the eve of his death. Neither with you only do I make this covenant and this oath, but with him that standeth here and with us this day before the Lord our God, and also with him that is not here with us on this day.
Akev. Moshe speaks to the Jewish people and discusses their faults as well as God's forgiveness. He mentions the sin of the golden calf, the rebellion of Korach, the sin of the Meraglim, and more. However, Moshe points out that God is merciful and has forgiven them for each sin. He specifically tells the Jewish people that the man was to teach them that their survival is in the hands of Hashem. They are commanded to destroy their idols and solely believe in God. The second paragraph of Shema, V'haya, is also part of this parsha, which includes many major mitzvot. A main theme of this parsha is mercy and forgiveness. There are several occasions where we, the Jewish people, have sinned, but the lesson here is that we can always do teshuvah and God will always be willing to forgive us.
In the first pasuk of Parshat Re'eh, we read, Re'eh Anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. It's very interesting that the Re'eh is in the singular and lifnechem is in the plural. So we get from this that each individual is a very important part of the team, and one shouldn't think that they shouldn't do it because the multitude is doing something else. Parshat Re'eh is all about the concept of chosenness and making good choices. And ever since I obtained these books, what should Danny do? What should Darla do? And what should Danny do at school? This is the #1 requested book when I'm reading to my grandchildren, whether it's in person or it's on Zoom. And they're interesting this is a book about vignettes about what this little boy encounters, and then he has to make a choice. And the kids always say, I'm going to choose the good choice, or I'm going to choose the bad choice. They came up with good and bad on their own. That is a basic understanding that we have the power to choose, and it is a very important power. And in fact, in this book, it is called a superpower, and it is the power to change things every single day. Parshat Re'eh outlines to the Jewish people incentives for making good choices and consequences for making poor choices. The concept of chosenness is a difficult concept. When you choose food in a supermarket, when you choose what house to buy, when you choose what path to take, there's no obligation on the inanimate object to do anything for you. However, the concept of chosenness between God and Israel is a reciprocal relationship, and each individual must take an active role in choosing to follow the commandments and making good choices for their team. So everybody, we have the superpower of power to choose. We need to do it.
The Parsha Shoftim starts with commandments that regard administering law and government functions, appointing judges and officers, and then laws regarding a king. Then more or less in the middle of the Parsha, there's a provision of the cities of refuge for an accidental killer. And then after that, laws about testimony in a court of law. And regarding the city of refuge, they set aside cities for someone who's killed someone, and this is someone who's killed someone accidentally, can flee to. And this thus is protecting from being killed by a relative of the person killed. Now, this provision of the city of refuge in this specific parsha at this juncture can be seen as designed to prevent people from taking the law into their own hands, but rather ensuring that society is based on law. Law must be administered and executed by the judges and officers mentioned at the beginning of the parsha.
Parshas Kitzatzeh. I'd like to dedicate this parsha in memory of my father, Yisrael ben Moshe, whose yard site is Thursday night, Friday. There are many laws in this one. 74 of the 613 commandments are found in this parsha. There's lots of food for thought and discussion, but and I'll give you a brief summary, but there are two which are directly connected to the book of Ruth and Shavuot. It begins with an emphasis on a mandate on how to be fair, especially to orphans, widows, strangers, and therefore this is the first connection, and leaving your crops of your food in the field left for, and in this case it's for Ruth, so that she may glean from the fields. It goes on in how to treat laborers and slaves, and that they must be allowed to eat on the job. There are many laws not to mix varieties, plants, animals, and clothing. And then there are the laws of family relationships, of sexuality, what constitutes adultery, the laws of divorce and marriage. Interestingly, there are the laws of lineage, which again is directly connected to Ruth, in which they discuss the Levirate marriage. A widow should, and in some cases must, marry the brother of her deceased husband in order to perpetuate the lineage or line of the family. Finally, there is the mandate to keep promises, especially in commerce, business, the laws of loans, and payments in the care of laborers. But there's also a promise at the very end of the parsha, the obligation to remember Amalek and what he did to you on the road on your way out of Egypt. And there was the ambush of the weak and the sick to the rear of the camp. And this is read on the Shabbos, Parshat Sachar, the Shabbos before Purim. It finishes with, you shall not forget. Lo tishka. Chag Sameach.
Ki Tevo. It's the end of Moshe's life. He has spent 40 years in the desert with Bnei Israel. Moshe's last speech to Bnei Israel, he reminds them of the covenant between them and Hashem. He brings up that they saw that they were brought out of Egypt, saw miracles, and that Hashem has brought them to the land of milk and honey. Moshe says, Hashem did not give you an understanding of heart, nor ears that see, nor eyes that see, nor ears that hear until this day. For 40 years, Moshe guided Bnei Israel. He lived with them. He taught them Torah. Moshe was their moral compass. This was his parting words to say to Bnei Israel, now it's your time to open up, apply the principles that I've taught you, and go on your own.
That was a perfect lead up. So I have Nitzavim, which is next, because Nitzavim is always the parsha right before Rosh Hashanah. And ideally, we would spend all of Elul and maybe the whole year gearing up towards Rosh Hashanah and then Yom Kippur. But life gets busy. So if you're about to run a marathon on next week, you don't, the night before, start running. You have to spend a couple of months or weeks. I don't know, I've never run a marathon. I don't know, leading up to it to train. It's definitely more than that. My husband's a marathon runner. But you definitely have to spend time getting ready for it. So Nitzavim, which is read right before Rosh Hashanah, is almost like this jolt when you're reading the Torah of, we have to get ready for Rosh Hashanah. And it's the same message that Moshe is giving to the Jewish people of, you can do this and you got this. It's the same thing that's like a pump up speech right before Rosh Hashanah of, you can do this, take things into heart, be aware, and go into the next year with your full heart and your full head. I have Vayelech, the next parsha, as well. Vayelech is a really interesting parsha because the whole parsha is Moshe's last day on earth. And this is a parsha we read right before Yom Kippur. Moshe Lichtenstein points out that Moshe must have had crazy emotions at this point in his life. He led the Jewish people through so much, and now it's his last day. What does he want to tell them? Bnei Israel has not achieved the national or religious maturity that will allow them to take the fate into their own hands, and they're totally dependent on Moshe as a leader. And he's the intermediary between them and God. And the people are completely panicked. What's going to happen when he dies? And he's like a parent teaching a child independence. And he expresses and instills in them a trust and a confidence in the people, and makes sure that he knows Yehoshua is taking over, the babysitter's coming, you got this, I believe in you, and you're going to be okay. And he leaves them with that strong message of you can do this.
So I feel like maybe I'm having some connection issues. I hope you guys can hear me. This is Ha'azinu. As with some others, my thoughts this evening also come from the late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha. And he teaches us a really beautiful lesson that can be learned from Ha'azinu about the precious individuality of each Jew in the world. Ha'azinu means listen to this, and that's a word that's set in the plural. In other words, it's addressed to the crowd. Most of the parsha is the Song of Moses, which is Moshe Rabbeinu's last teaching to the entirety of Bnei Israel before he leaves them for good. And one could expect that a blessing over a crowd of this size would emphasize its collective strength, its size, its mass. After all, we know the individual faces can often get lost in the crowd. However, the second pasuk tells us, let my teaching fall as rain. And the Torah here is compared to the rain that makes everything grow. There are people that believe that the Torah seeks uniformity among us above everything else, for all of us to be the same. We learn from this parsha that just as the rain brings the potential of every plant and every flower to grow into what it can individually be, so too the Torah brings us closer to what we are meant to be as individuals.
All right, I'm bringing it home. V'zot habracha. V'zot habracha asher berach Moshe ish Elokim et bnei Israel lifnei moto. And this is the blessing with which Moshe, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. In one of his interesting comments, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kutsk says that just as you can accept that your friend's nose is not like yours, you must understand that your friend's views are different from yours. If we do not get annoyed with other people's nose or eye, that other people's nose or eyes don't look the same as ours, we have to accept that sometimes others don't think the same as we do too. Moses opens this parsha with the words, and this is a blessing with which Moshe, the man of God, blessed the children of Israel before his death. He declares that we all share an overall goal. The Torah that Moshe commanded us is a legacy for the congregation of Yaakov. Moses continues with a series of blessings, varying in content and purpose, that are tailor-made for each of the 12 tribes. Each one is given a different attribute and different life task. Take note that although each group is given a different task in life, the blessings do not commence with introductory words. These are the blessings in the plural form. The fact that the singular form, this is the blessing, is used proves that it is one blessing only. We all share a common goal, and each tribe has its own way of achieving it. Being different is not a problem. It's an integral part of the blessing. The Kabbalist Rabbi Chaim Vital discusses in his book, It's Chaim, what his teacher, the Arizal, says about the different styles, customs, and versions of prayer of Jewish communities. At the entrance of heaven, there are 12 windows corresponding to the 12 tribes of Israel, and each tribe's prayers go up to heaven, passing through its designated gate. If the prayer of all the tribes were the same, there would be no need for 12 different gates. But since each gate has its own path, therefore it must be that each tribe's prayers are different. Just as the source and root of each tribe's soul is different, so the nature of their prayers is different.
Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek, That was really great. Thank you all so much for participating in the third rendition of Torah in a Flash. And whether you spoke or just listened or both, I hope this was as beautiful for you as it was for me and got you excited for Shavuot. I just want to put in one last plug for the programming we have going on at Young Israel this weekend. We have a women's tea and schmooze with Ruthie Brafman-Schulman, and a barbecue on the second day of Yom Tov, and various learning opportunities throughout the weekend. And so with that, I wish you all a great week ahead and Chag Sameach.
Thank you so much.
Sameach, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ronit. Chag Sameach.
Thank you.